The Byzantines woke up one morning, and Ottoman warships were already inside their harbor. No chain was broken, no gate was opened, no sea battle was fought. 70 warships had crossed a mountain, overnight, in complete silence. The most heavily guarded harbor in the world, bypassed before anyone realized what was happening. This is not legend. This happened in 1453, and it remains one of the most audacious military operations in the entire history of warfare. Constantinople, the ultimate fortress. Protected by triple land walls, a deep-sea moat, and a harbor sealed behind an unbreakable iron chain. For over 1,000 years, every emperor who tried to break those walls failed. The city watched empires shatter against its stones. Then came a 21-year-old sultan named Mehmed II, and he brought something none of his predecessors had, a completely different kind of mind. He didn't just want to win the battle. He wanted to make the battle irrelevant. And he found the one crack in a perfect wall, the Golden Horn Harbor, the city's hidden underbelly, protected by a massive iron chain stretching across the mouth. No warship could pass through. Mehmed's cannons were already hammering the land walls daily, but the defenders held. European reinforcements were sailing to save the city. Time was running out. He needed a second front, an angle of attack so impossible that no military mind in the world would have thought to defend against it. He climbed to the ridge above the Bosphorus and stood there in silence. He wasn't looking at the water, he was looking at the hills. "If the sea won't open for us," Mehmed said quietly, "then we will carry our fleet over the land." His senior commanders exchanged glances. 70 warships, over a mountain, in a single night. The idea wasn't just impossible, it was completely insane. And that was exactly why it would work. Because no enemy in history builds a defense against something they cannot imagine happening. But the plan had one absolute condition: total, unbreakable secrecy. A single Byzantine scout seeing one ship on that hill would end everything. One fire arrow from the walls, just one, and 70 ships would become 70 bonfires lighting up the night sky. If this failed, they all died on that hill. So before he moved a single ship, Mehmed did something far more dangerous first. He set out to make the enemy look the wrong way. He ordered his heaviest cannons to open a full, relentless bombardment of the western land walls. Deafening, non-stop, hour after hour, day bleeding into night. He massed thousands of troops at the main gates. Fake assault formations, staged supply movements, deliberate noise. A performance designed for one audience, the emperor watching from the walls. The Byzantine emperor watched it all and believed it completely. Every elite guard was pulled west. The harbor was left to skeleton patrols. The trap was set. The stage was dark. The enemy was looking exactly where Mehmed wanted them to look. Now came the impossible part. The moment the sun vanished, thousands of Ottoman engineers poured silently into the Galata hills. No torches, no shouted orders, no sounds except the forest. They had spent weeks preparing this in secret. Massive logs had been pre-cut, stripped, and carved into cylindrical rollers, shaped to cradle a warship's hull. The rollers were packed deep in rendered animal fat, hundreds of slaughtered cattle reduced to raw grease, coating every surface until the whole track gleamed black. A frictionless highway over a mountain. Then the oxen were harnessed. Thousands of them, yoked to ropes as thick as a man's arm, attached to the lead galley's bow. Behind them, tens of thousands of soldiers, hands on the rope. No drums, no war cries. Mehmed himself rode among the lines, pointing silently in the dark. The silence was the most terrifying part. The command came in a whisper. Every man leaned forward at once. The ropes went taut, and then the first hull groaned as it was dragged out of the water. The massive keel hit the first roller. The wood screamed under the weight. For one horrible second, it didn't move. Then it did, slowly, impossibly. Wood groaning against wood. Thousands of boots digging trenches in the wet earth. The galley rising up the hillside in the darkness like something from a nightmare. And then, 70 minutes in, a lead rope snapped. The crack split the silence like a cannon shot. Every man froze. The galley lurched backwards 6 inches before the brake ropes caught it. 6 inches from crushing every man below under a wall of wood and iron. They held it, barely. The broken rope was replaced in under 2 minutes. No one spoke. The oxen were repositioned. The pull began again, inch by inch. One snapped rope was survivable, but one mistake anywhere on that hillside, wrong angle, wrong timing, wrong grip, and the entire operation was finished. 3 ships into the operation, a Byzantine patrol boat appeared at the harbor mouth below, sweeping its torch across the water. Every man on the hill froze. The torchlight swept slowly, once, twice. The chain gleamed in the light, intact and unbroken. The patrol moved on. 100 men exhaled at the same time. They had been close enough to hear the water lapping against the patrol boat's hull, close enough to smell the torch smoke. No one dared breathe. On the other side of the hills, the Byzantine emperor stood on the western walls watching the cannons flash. He looked down at his harbor. Safe, quiet, sealed. He had no idea. None. While he watched the artillery, a ghost fleet was climbing through the forest behind him, one rope pull at a time. The hardest section of the route was a sharp, blind turn carved between 2 massive tree lines, a 90-degree pivot for a ship 60 feet long. On the 3rd pivot attempt, a galley's stern swung wide and struck a tree with a hollow boom that rolled through the darkness. Silence. 10 seconds. 20. No reaction from the walls below. The artillery had swallowed the sound. But one mistake at the wrong moment, and that boom would have been the last sound of the campaign. Dawn was 4 hours away. They had completed 11 ships. 59 remained. The hardest part wasn't the mountain, it was the race against the sun. If daylight hit the Galata Hills before the fleet was hidden in the water, every ship still on the slope would be visible from the city walls. It would be over. Mehmed sent riders back down the line with one message. No rests, no pauses, no hesitation. Every ship moves simultaneously. Right now. By midnight, the first ship reached the absolute summit of the Galata Ridge. Below it, the steep drop into the Golden Horn. The hardest half was done. The most dangerous half was beginning. Descending was infinitely more dangerous than climbing. Gravity was no longer an obstacle. Gravity was the enemy. A slipping galley wouldn't slow down, it would shatter. Anchor chains were looped around massive trees as braking mechanisms. Teams of soldiers gripped the stern ropes, acting as human counterweights in the dark. The first galley began its descent. The fat-coated rollers started smoking immediately, the friction of 100 tons of wood grinding downhill under its own weight. Halfway down, one of the braking chains jumped its anchor point. The ship accelerated suddenly, pulling 20 men off their feet before they dragged it back. 20 men hanging horizontally in the air from a rope attached to a sliding warship on a mountain slope. They held. The chain was reset. The descent continued. Back at the western walls, Mehmed's artillery intensified to maximum rate. The ground shook. The sound was overwhelming, total, consuming. It masked everything happening behind the hills. 2 hours before dawn. 30 ships still on the slope. 3 already sitting quietly in the water of the Golden Horn. The race was entering its final leg. An ox team on the upper section suddenly panicked. 3 animals rearing, pulling sideways against the line, threatening to jackknife the ship on the incline. Mehmed rode to the point personally. He dismounted. He grabbed the lead ox by the bridle with both hands and pulled it straight. The animal steadied. The others followed. A sultan, holding an ox by the face on a mountain slope in the dark. History remembers the conquest, not the thousands of invisible moments that made it possible. 1 hour before dawn, the last ships were making their descent. Below, the Golden Horn was slowly filling with dark shapes that had no business being there. Then, the hull of the final galley kissed the still water of the harbor. A silent, perfect, impossible landing. 70 ships, 0 detection. The operation was complete. 70 heavily armed Ottoman warships sat quietly in the Golden Horn harbor, behind the iron chain, inside the city's ultimate defense. The trap was already sprung. The Byzantines just didn't know it yet. As the mist thickened just before sunrise, the Ottoman crews lashed the ships to the harbor floor, ran out the cannon ports, and waited in total silence. The Byzantine night watch finished their rounds. The chain was intact. The water was empty on their side. Everything was normal. And then the sun came up. The mist began to burn off. A harbor guard leaned over the seawall and looked down at the water. He went completely still.
Red banners, Ottoman crescents, cannon mouth staring up at him from the deck of a warship sitting directly below his feet. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Then he found his voice, and he screamed so hard it cracked. Within 60 seconds, alarm bells were exploding across every district of Constantinople. Soldiers poured out of barracks half-dressed, without orders, colliding with each other in the narrow streets. No one knew where to go. No one understood what was happening. The emperor was dragged from bed and rushed to the harbor walls. He looked down at the ships. He looked back at his generals. No one spoke. This was the moment Mehmed had built every detail of the last several weeks to create. Not a military victory, a psychological one. The emperor faced the decision no commander survives cleanly: split his already exhausted army in three, or surrender the harbor entirely. Both options led to the same place. He split. Thousands of men were yanked from the land walls and rushed to the harbor in a desperate, disorganized scramble, exactly as Mehmed knew he would. The moment the land wall garrison thinned, Mehmed unleashed everything. Every cannon, every drum, every janissary formation surged forward simultaneously. From the harbor, Ottoman warships opened fire on the sea walls at point-blank range. From the land, the bombard cannons hammered the already weakened gates. The crossfire was total. Byzantine galleys trapped in the harbor tried to attack the Ottoman fleet. Outnumbered, outgunned, fighting in waters that had been their own harbor 12 hours ago. A naval battle erupted in the confined waters of the Golden Horn. The harbor became a killing ground. Mehmed's engineers threw a floating pontoon bridge across the harbor in hours. Ottoman infantry streamed across it toward the sea walls in an endless column. The defenders were now fighting simultaneously on three fronts: land walls to the west, harbor walls to the south, and the pontoon bridge to the east. Exhausted men spread across 3 miles of wall. Men who hadn't slept in days were now sprinting between positions, fighting, retreating, fighting again. Not breaking from cowardice, breaking from pure physical impossibility. The St. Romanus Gate had been under continuous cannon bombardment for 40 days. A 1,000-year-old wall that had survived everything. On the 41st day, it cracked. The bombard fired again. The crack became a fracture. The fracture became a breach. For the first time in its entire history, the walls of Constantinople had an opening. The janissaries went through it like water through a broken dam. Elite, rested, fanatical. Everything the defenders were no longer. Inside the city, the sound changed. The distant thunder of cannons was replaced by something worse. Boots on cobblestones, screaming in the streets. The enemy was inside. The emperor, Constantine XI, ripped off his imperial insignia so he couldn't be captured alive. He drew his sword. He charged into the melee on foot. He was never seen again. The last emperor of Rome, heir to a civilization that had survived for over 2,000 years, disappeared into a street fight in his own city. No body was ever found. They were fighting a battle that had already been decided on a hillside in the dark 3 weeks earlier. The walls didn't fall to cannons. They fell to geometry. By afternoon, the crescent banner was raised over the Hagia Sophia. The greatest church in Christendom stood silent. Its 1,000 years of Christian empire ended in a single afternoon. Mehmed entered the city on horseback through the broken gate. He was 21 years old. He walked into the Hagia Sophia alone. He knelt on the stone floor. He wept. Then he stood up, looked around at what he had done, and said, "What a city we have given to plunder and ruin." He immediately ordered the killing stopped. He wanted a capital, not a cemetery. The city would become the new heart of his empire. And the iron chain? It still stretched perfectly across the harbor mouth. Intact, unbroken, never touched. A monument to a defense that had been made completely irrelevant. The chain had been perfect. That was the problem. Mehmed hadn't attacked the thing the Byzantines were defending. He had simply made that thing not matter. When the news reached Rome, the Pope locked himself in his chambers and refused to emerge for 3 days. A cardinal wrote in his diary, "Rome has fallen, again." Kings across Europe panicked. Emergency councils were summoned. Crusade proposals were drafted, debated, and quietly abandoned. No one came. The city was already gone. Byzantine scholars fled westward, carrying manuscripts that hadn't been read in centuries. Their exodus would help ignite the Renaissance. The trade routes that fed Europe for 1,000 years were severed overnight. Within 50 years, explorers would be sailing west into unknown oceans, searching desperately for the routes that had just been closed. The iron chain still remained intact across the harbor mouth, a perfect defense against an enemy who attacked through the sea, completely useless against an enemy who crossed the mountain instead. Mehmed the Conqueror did not earn his title with numbers. He earned it by refusing to accept the rules of the battlefield he had been handed, and building a completely different one. The 70 ships that sailed over the earth proved something that cannot be taught in any military academy. A fortress is only as strong as the defender's ability to imagine what the enemy is willing to do. The Byzantines didn't lose because they were weak. They lost because they were rational. They defended every realistic threat perfectly. Mehmed simply brought an unrealistic one. The iron chain was the perfect shield. Against the attack it was designed to stop. Mehmed changed the attack. The chain became irrelevant. The city fell.
That is the oldest lesson in warfare. Empires fall, chains rust, walls crumble. But somewhere in the dark, right now, another impossible plan is already being drawn. History belongs to the ones who refuse to accept the battlefield they were given. If you want more of it, subscribe to Epic Sagas. The next impossible story is already waiting.